Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For this guide, I'll be talking about Blade Best Relic, light cones, team comp, rotations, pros and cons, and if you should pull for him. Here are his required materials and skill priority. For an overview on his kit, he's a destruction unit which focuses on handling multiple enemies. His main damaging ability comes from his whole kit, where he scales on HP instead of attack. He's also sort of almost skill point neutral, which is his main selling point, where you can either run him as a hyper carry DPS or sub DPS, though you still have to run him against wind weak enemies. For his Eidolons, he is totally E0 sufficient. For his E1, his ultimate deals increased damage to a single enemy target, scaling from Blade's HP loss in battle at a cap of 90% of his max HP, and the value will be reset and reaccumulated again when he uses his ultimate. His E2 increases his crit rate by 15%. His E4 increases his max HP by 20%, stacking up to 2 times. His E6 reduces his charged stacks from 5 to 4, which makes him do better as a hyper carrier sub DPS unit. For his best price to performance ratio, honestly his Eidolons aren't that good. It's either you E0 or E6 him. There's no in between, as the damage increase are way too low till his E6. How to build Blade. For his main stat, for the body you want crit damage. For the boots you want speed over HP percent. Substat priority. Speed till 121 or 134. After that, focus on 70% total crit rate and focus on crit damage and HP percent lastly. With speed boots you gain 122 speed. For HP percent boots you gain a 14.5 to 15% DPS boost, but with speed boots, it's actually more consistent, as with 97 base speed from Blade, he barely takes a turn, which will put speed boots above HP percent boots. Overall, would recommend players run to speed boots to hit that 121 speed threshold, as it's more than enough for endgame stats. For hyper carry Blade you may want 134 speed. Onto his relic set. It's very straightforward. His best in slot will be 4-piece Longvis Disciple, due to needing 16% less crit rate on him, which is way easier on the substats. Another best in slot will be 2-piece Longvis plus 2-piece Messenger, for an easy 134 speed min-max Blade, but you must have double S tier relic set pieces on it to hit 70% crit rate. 4-piece Quantum and 2+2 with Wind set also works, but they're way too substat hungry, as you have to hit 70% crit rate with Blade, which is not recommended. Overall, players should either go for 4-piece Longvis or 2+2 set with Messenger. Just a tip for new players, you should never throw away your current set piece in case if they get worse substats. And now for the Planar Ornament. Main stat for the rope, you want HP percent only, as Blade scales better with HP over attack hugely. And for the orb, either wind or HP percent. Damage difference is very minimal. Players should still pick the one with better substats, unless if they're equal go for wind DMG boost instead, as it's more universal for both hyper carry or sub DPS Blade. He has 2 Planar Ornament set which he can use. First is Relic Arena, which is overall his best set, with it giving the higher DPS multipliers in most scenarios with a higher crit rate requirement. His second best in slot is Inert Salsado, which is less crit rate heavy, though still good to aim for 65% and above total crit rate with this set. His enhanced basic attack will have a damage loss of 6.1%, while follow-up attack and ulti damage increases by 4.6 to 4.9%. Honestly, they're actually both similar. Players should farm for whichever is more universal for their account by farming the same relic set that your other DPS units are using. Now for his light cones, I'll start from the worst to best. He has very limited light cone options that he can use. At last place we have On the Fall of an Eon at S5. It's a free S5 with a rough 20% DPS loss from his signature LC. If you're fighting enemies which are weak to wind weakness, it puts this light cone at only a 12% DPS loss, though still great, as this light cone is universal and will work better with a mono wind team comp. At second place we have both Secret Vow and Clara's signature LC, which is a rough 10% DPS loss at max, which makes either of these light cones really viable. With Secret Vow at S5, it's better than his signature LC. At first place it's both Blade and Jingliu signature LC, where Jingliu light cone performs better compared to Blade's by 8 to 10%, which will be pretty disappointing for most players if they plan to pull for Blade's light cone. Though Blade's signature LC gives crit rate, which is the most important stat for him, which will put the difference down to the same or at most a 4% DPS loss, and comes with a 10% plus healing bonus. Here are the numbers on the damage difference for the light cones. Overall, I recommend players to use what they have, and players shouldn't pull for Blade Signature LC unless they're a fanboy, as the best price to performance ratio for a Signature LC should be a minimum of 20% DPS boost. And now for his team comp and rotations. There's nothing really much to talk about, as you want to use Blade only when you're facing enemies weak to wind weakness for both hyper carry or sub DPS Blade. Though his best sustain unit would be Lynx to manipulate aggro or any 5-star sustain, and his best buffer is Bronya. For Bronya with 150 plus speed, you still want speed boots on Blade with 122 speed. As without speed boots, Blade might not take 2 turns with Bronya. For slow Bronya, you want Blade with 1 or 2 speed above her. His best mono team comp would be Bronya, Silverwolf and Huohuo or Fushuen. You can even run him with Jingliu to activate his follow-up attack very frequently, where you want to focus Bronya's skill on Jingliu instead of Blade. For Blade pros and cons. Pros: highest wind element DPS unit, minus 0.5 for skill point consumption. He excels at both hyper and sub DPS with his low skill point consumption. He has good design. Cons: he's an old unit, already outscaled as he got defeated by Jingliu both in game and DPS, though element is still more important. He's not really needed even as a sub DPS, but may or never change in future. Harder to build if you're aiming for min-max, as other DPS units don't use the same relic sets as him. So should you pull for Blade? Yes, if you have Silverwolf, Huohuo and Bronya but no Seal or Jingliu. Yes, if you like his design. No, if you have a E6 4-star Dan Heng. Overall, I wouldn't recommend players to pull for him or even his signature LC, as the other limited 5-star units are way more valuable. There are only 2 valid cases of pulling him. First would be that you don't have a wind DPS. Second would be pulling him as a sub DPS unit, as he pretty much doesn't consume any skill points, but it's kind of unnecessary unless you really like his design. And that's it for this guide.